What's up guys, Frank Macaluso from Garageaholic giving you another episode of the E24 LT1. Today we're going to be doing an episode sponsored by CATuned. Yes, that's right. They provided us the coilover suspension that we will be installing on this thing, both front and rear. And we're going to be integrating the front sway bar to the upper perches that come with the CATuned kit to allow you to install a custom front sway bar with custom length links to the strut bar, to the strut housing on the E24 suspension provided by CATuned. Very unique setup. I did this on the E30 M54 and I'm proud to do it on this car as well. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So doing the fronts first, probably a good place to start. Now, with the CATuned coilovers for the front, basically we're going to be removing everything from here up and replacing it with a complete strut housing assembly. But in order to do that, there is a shock that's embedded into this housing. We need to remove that shock. In order to remove the shock, we have to compress the spring, remove the upper spring hat, and take everything off, including the shock, as one piece, and then we can do our cut. One of my favorite tools, and I say it again and again, is the Rockwell Draw Horse. I bought this about 10 years ago and I use it a lot, as you can tell. It gets used. Now that it's clicked in, we can start compressing the spring and loosening the top nut with a 17 millimeter. I use these spring compressors. I don't really think that they are the best, but they definitely work. They work really well, and they, they're not the safest. They actually have clamshell types that are a little bit more secure. But for me, this is good enough to disconnect a spring in a pinch, and what you use is basically a 1/2-inch impact gun in order to get it squared away. Once you get it in position here. Okay, that's one. So now what we essentially want to do is use the impact to go a little bit on each one until the spring is compressed enough to relieve the tension on the spring hat, and then you can use the 17 millimeter to drive the bearing out from the top. And all you gotta do is now you can just drive it out as long as you hold the hat. When it comes out, there's probably still gonna be a little bit of tension here. In fact, it's being held in by the drop hat here. So we have to be really careful. And I'm gonna try to literally drive this out. Might need to hit it. Probably need to hit it. So now the next challenging part, which if you have the right tools is not very challenging, is to remove the nut that holds and secures the shock in. You can see the shock is completely blown. But to remove the shock nut, you want to use a lot of torque. And I use that with a big pipe wrench. Now I know it's not conventional to use a pipe wrench on a piece of BMW suspension component, but I gotta tell you, it works. So what you need to do is when you have the jaw horse locked up, you need to make sure, and it might be iterative, you might have to try this a couple times, that you have a counter against the torque that you're applying to loosen the nut, because it's gonna take a lot of torque. And if you end up squeezing, if you end up trying to loosen this up and it starts spinning, stop, reset, and try again. So let's see how it works. Yeah, it's spinning. There we go. Okay. Once you get it broken, it's pretty easy to remove it with your hand. And once you remove it with your hand, the shock should come right on out. There you go. The assembly is much lighter now. And now with everything removed, what we need to do is we need to trim 1 inch above, probably right around there. And this all comes off, including these upper sway bar mounts and all of, obviously the spring perch is all removed. So what we need to do is we need to mount this thing, something like that, so you can use a nice sawzall and get good access to remove that. So now that both hubs have been completely disassembled except the bearing, the ABS teeth wheels have been cleaned up and the sensors removed. So now it's a matter of getting the strut from CATuned to sit atop and over this diameter and then weld at the base. So this is a front and a rear set from CATuned. This is an E24 full-on coilover set. Now, this is the front. You can tell because it has an adjustable camber plate on front. So they actually did a really good job of presetting the camber right to the center. Comes with the hardware as well. And you can see that the bottom part, which actually hasn't been resident on previous versions, they've upgraded this recently, is that they've got a notch in the middle here. And you'll see that as you slip this part over the existing strut housing, that this notch fits perfectly. So we're going to show you the technique on how to align this. But this is the rear. The rear has the lower shock mount already set up, so it just sits right inside of the trailing arm. And it is already preloaded. Both of these are already preloaded from the factory. This guy here is the ride height, and we'll adjust that later on in the video as we get the car settled down on the ground. And this here is the upper shock mount. There is no adjustability, obviously, for the rear. And that's basically about it. I also had elected Igor to provide me with the upper sway bar. This is an upper sway bar mount. Basically, you need to thread it on right in here. And the sway bar mount literally allows the normal sway bar to be used like it does stock. Obviously, you don't see it here on the assembly, which is why they provided these. And of course, part of that are adjusters and shock. These are double adjustable shocks. So you put the adjuster inside. You take this adjuster and you can literally put it inside and you can turn for shock hardness and response. So without further ado, let's go on ahead and get this guy installed. So first what we need to do is remove this lower spring perch, this bar here, and we need to clean it up. We need to get rid of the powder coating from the bottom part, make sure it's got good welding characteristics. So when we put on the spindle arm, we can weld it up. I'll show you how to align it. Let's go now. So now this notch here that I described earlier goes right on this side here. That allows us to sit nice and snug to make a nice even level with this flavor right there. Snug, really snug. But once you get it, it should kind of like just sit over there, and then you can kind of play with it a little bit there. And when it's installed like this, it kind of rotates a little bit. Right, so you got to find that right spot, and I'll show you this other side in a minute. But it also moves like that, and a tiny little movement down here at the base, it translates to a lot of movement up here where it's going to end up mounting on the shock tower. So you need to make sure that when you install these, you install them both the exact same way, so that when you're adjusting your camber at the top on both sides, it's an identical representation of the actual camber. You can see here when I rattle the top here back and forth, it actually changes the spacing here. And that's not good. So what we need to do is make sure we have the right exact amount of spacing. So what we need to do is use a very specifically spaced washer and put it right here so that when you flex this and compress this down, it will compress against this washer and maintain the exact same overall spacing between the strut housing and the spindle arm. When you compress them together with my draw horse, you'll find that it's going to actually set it in the exact right position. Okay, so now the strut, the lower strut arm is now pinned through the Rockwell draw horse into this. And you can see how this, what I was talking about with the washer spacer, that actually keeps this whole space, this whole gap here uniform throughout, so for me to lay a really nice bead of weld on there. And all I want to do right now is just lay a couple of tacks, one here, one on this side of the washer, one on the other side of the washer, and then basically 4 tacks. And when I do that, I can take the washer out and then just lay my big bead all the way across the entire thing. And there we are. The welds go all the way up to the upper brake caliper mount, and they come down and goes around just like that. And you got to remember that these are much thicker than stock as it is right now. The comparison of the thickness of this to the actual stock is like almost twice as thick. So this is actually wrapping around it, and it's been getting welded about probably 7/8 of the way around its entire circumference, its perimeter, if you will. And this should be more than strong enough to handle the load of the E24 6 Series. And here is a finished product. Pour 15, cleaned, ready to go, ready for installation. Let's move on to the rears. This is a rear strut assembly. Basically, it's already a preloaded shock, just like the fronts. In this case, it's much, much easier. We just need to remove both of the assemblies from either side and then replace with the new one. And on the CATuned version, this is adjustable, so it'll be a lot easier to get installed. So let's just remove the old ones first and then move from there. So inside the trunk, on the passenger side, you'll see that there are 3 bolts, just like on the front. And that actually, you remove those 3 and the whole thing will just drop out. Got this. And there it goes. Now, when installing the rears, before you really install them, you really want to make sure that you have both of them at the same ride height. You're going to be adjusting it after the fact anyway, but in order to make sure you have the right ride height, you use a vernier calipers to measure the distance between this guy and that guy. I don't care what the distance is, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that this side is the same exact distance as that side. And then what I did was I basically loosely tightened the lower strut housing onto this lock nut. And when I put it on the car, I'm going to end up, adjusting the ride height after the weight is settled and everything like that. And you always want to adjust it with this collar here, not this one. If you tighten or loosen this one, you're changing the spring rate. And that's nothing you don't want to do. That's something that is set by the factory. So the rear here is just kind of affixed with a 22mm bolt, and then that kind of goes right into the trailing arm. And the upper here, as you can see, it's still floating. What we need to do is use a jack and jack this up from below, get it in the holes, and then we can go from inside the trunk. And in the trunk, we can tighten those 3 bolts for the upper shock tower. The rear is basically set up, it's time to install the front. And as you can see here, I got my upper sway bar mounts installed. And this came from CATuned, but I made a couple of modifications by welding a little bit more metal to the actual ringlets, and that's because I want to make sure that they don't break under the increased stress of the longer custom sway bar. I think that for a factory sway bar, that the factory sway bar mount should be fine, but I wanted to make sure that these don't fail on me under the increased load and weight of the LT1. So now I've got those installed. It's a matter of threading those puppies onto those. And let's get the engine in first though, to make sure that we got the weight back on the front of the car, so when we put it down, we know that everything is tilted to the right side. Now I know it sounds a little bit unorthodox, but the way to really get this thing in correctly is as you drop it. I'm telling you, the frame rail distance between the frame rails and the dimensions, the outside dimensions of the engine are so close. You kind of want to shake the engine, making sure that it's still free and unobstructed as you're slowly bringing it down. And as you slowly bring it down, that you don't hear any cracks or issues. I think it's still good. I wanted to get it up, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the plan moving forward. Once the engine's set in place, I'm going to get the front suspension arms in with the spindles, get the wheel on, and then put the whole thing down on the ground and see how everything sits as CATuned had set it from the factory. Then if we realize it is too high or too low, we can always adjust, and I'll show you how to do that too. All right, let's put this puppy on the ground and see what it looks like. Now remember, there's no steering rack, so the wheels are probably going to be a little bit oblong. Oh, and it's definitely low. It's so low that I can't even get the jack out of it. Oh yeah. Look how low it is. It's so low. Woo. I like the rear. Rear looks good. It's a little bit too low. We got to bring it up, raise it up just a little bit. Maybe in the front, way more than the rear. I think the rear is good. I think the front needs to be raised up a little bit more. Okay, cut. All right, I got the suspension dialed in. Raise it up in the front a little bit, just enough to get the lift out from underneath. And it looks so baller. Now picture this. The car's clean, it's got an M-Tech front bumper, and the roar of an LT1 Gen 5 455 horsepower. The perfect ride height. Thank you so much, Igor at CATuned, for providing these amazing coilovers. The installation was easy and seamless, and now everybody here knows how to install the coilovers on their E24, not just E24s, but it applies to E30s and E34s and E39s and E38s, any other vintage BMW model series. Guys, my name is Frank Macaluso from Garageaholic. Thank you so much again, CATuned, for sponsoring this episode and providing these coilovers. And guys, I guess that's just about it for me. Stay tuned to the next episode. Thanks. Later.